Okay, so in continuation in part 2 here, what we're looking at over here on the starboard side is a crack that, as far as I can tell, has not been induced by collision or the stresses inherent in such, but most likely is due to the incursion of moisture and cyclical loading. Now, right here in this corner, the builder had constructed a fairing. Let me get around this piece of wood here. Had constructed a fairing which consists of a piece of 3mm plywood heavily roved with triaxial glass on the outside. Now, in the past I had considered heavily reinforcing the inboard side of this forward bulkhead with the addition of a Warren style truss and in this local area, and possibly a second inner layer of 9mm plywood to improve its strength. However, after reading through the cylinder mold construction manual several times and taking into consideration the construction recommendations provided by the designer, Mr. Hughes, I realized that he had advised the builders to create these curvaceous joints by using a large piece of sono tube, covering it with some wax paper, a piece of glass roving, and then a massive blob of Cabosil and Q-Cell filled epoxy, and then using this tube essentially as a mold surface, pushing it up against the hull, securing it in place, and wiping out the excess. So this curve, as per the design recommendations, would have more likely been slightly smaller in its periphery and its radius. However, rather than having a hollow cavity which lacks the rigidity of a solid oversized fillet or cove, he created these cavities, and this 1mm skin, despite the presence of triaxial roving, in my humble opinion, as far as I can tell, is indicated by the presence of cracks, lacks the rigidity to support the stresses that this structure is subjected to. Now, in addition to this shortcoming, these cavities, voids, are prone to accumulating moisture, condensation, and water, and this may very well have contributed to the incursion of moisture in the butt joint at this wooden gusset in the corner here. This is a 12mm wooden gusset, and you can see, let me get in here a little bit closer, pardon the moving camera. You can see the presence of the crack here that has started to move up this bulkhead, and essentially, for the time being, terminates right above the top of this gusset. Now, unfortunately, it has migrated up into the plywood, therefore necessitating some excavation removal, and I may need to replace this piece of plywood to stop this crack from progressing. It should be noted as well that another crack has formed right here at the end of this transverse stringer. That could be from the presence of moisture, and as well as along this trampoline attachment stringer, you can see some surface cracks here which are common to this area and not really seen anywhere else as of yet. So I had reviewed the later design of the 40-foot trimaran included in the Rapid Construction Designs on Mr. Hughes' website. It's specified as a 40-foot length And excuse me, I had looked at the design and noticed that the aft connectives had the same streamlined tapered geometry, triangular geometry, as the forward connectives, and I'm quite pleased to say that the forward connectives have not suffered from this type of cracking. On the forward side, where the upper fairing tapers down and joins right here, there's a very, very large radius here in this corner, and I would imagine that that diffuses any stress that is encountered here quite well. But considering the structural inadequacy of this cavity down here and this very thin fairing and its ability to not only collect but retain moisture, it may not be necessary to taper down the upper fairing in the same way, although that may improve the aerodynamics of this boat a little bit, which is always helpful when you're trying to claw your way to windward. So, pending the recommendations of the designer, removing this forward bulkhead altogether and putting in stations in this connective and bringing the deck down to a sloping taper may not be necessary, and I will refrain from doing so at his discretion. But this area where the plywood bulkhead has started to crack, that does need to be removed. The inner frame, which is integral to this part, may need to be removed as well whenever I cut into the starboard side bulkhead and remove the frame. I'd found that the moisture that came into this area had migrated down along the AMA side and had caused some wood degradation further down. So it's very important to address this sort of thing very seriously, rather than just excavating it out and slapping a little bit of glass on it. I need to actually get in here, get into this fairing, see if the wood is bad. I will likely remove it, and following the construction recommendations in the manual from Mr. Hughes, I will use a large piece of sono tube and put in a massive Q-cell fillet. And that, in concert with possibly a little bit of secondary bonding, some triaxial reinforcement here, I would probably put that on with a primary bond. Just get down to wood, put in a quick fillet, and put in some reinforcement there, and that issue may be permanently resolved. So moving up here, you can see that the builder had used a plywood backing plate, which was bonded to the side of this transverse wooden stringer with a butt joint. That's a less than desirable practice. Ideally, these backing plates should be carried down onto any vertical surface in the nearby adjacent area. So before I put this upper fairing on, I may make provisions to do that as well. Perhaps a tapered piece of core material bonded in here, and as the upper fairing is put down, I'll go underneath, put in a large cove, and bring down some glass reinforcement for a backing plate. Composite backing plates are superior by far, to the best of my knowledge, to metal ones. They're immune to corrosion, much lighter, and they can distribute the stress into other areas of the structure and contribute to their overall strength. Now, going into this area, we can see that there was some moisture and some water in here. I'll try to get down. There we go. You can see this transverse piece of lumber here has some discoloration around its perimeter. Even in the upper areas, there was a steel fastener in here that corroded, a bronze fastener which has some corrosion, and some discoloration of the wood in the front here. Now, looking at this piece of plywood, you can see that the surface condition is slightly different, and to me this looks like it was installed in the original build, and this may have been put in later on as a repair. So there's a possibility that this sort of crack may have happened once before, and somebody already went in and removed this section of the bulkhead and put in a new section. Alright, I'm going to get into part 3 here, as this is getting quite lengthy.